Hello, it's Lawrence Romanosky from Calgary, Canada, and my daughter and I are going to do a review of this Tesla Model 3. Now it's the fall of 2021. The vehicle's been out for several years. There's lots of videos on it. We know it's fast, we know it's clever, and this video, I think I'll try to add something to the video sphere by talking about its positioning and talking about how it compares to some of the recent German EVs that are coming out. So Tesla had the whole EV landscape basically to themselves. They more or less invented it. And this, of course, caught everybody's attention, and then all the big German and American OEMs are jumping in. So now, in the fall of 2021, there's a flood of new German, South Korean, American cars. So how does this Tesla Model 3 stand up, and how does it compare and differ from the new entrants in the market? So we'll do a detailed review. All my reviews are pretty long. I'll break it up into sections. The first thing we'll do is just walk around the car and explain some of the tech in it. And then I'll go through why I think the Tesla is a little bit different, and who I think would be interested in the car. And we'll get into a discussion of the autonomous driving and the limitations of it, which I will describe. And then we'll end it on a whiteboard with Tesla math. And so I'll go over the math of the measures in units and capacities of the car, consumption of the car, range of the car, etc. Okay, so that's the video. It'll probably be about an hour. I'll break it into sections, and we'll go through it. Thanks. Here we've preheated the cabin, and so it's warm when we get here, and then we've got the controls at the bottom for the heated seats if we wish, wipers, etc. And I can unlock the car from my phone inside the house and preheat the cabin, and all of that's quite convenient.
Daddy, we're going to be late for school.
All right, so I need to get these kids to school. All right, and this is what the school run looks like with my three darling children, 4, 6, and 8. How are you guys doing back there?
Good.
You want to go in the middle, huh? Okay, well, if you don't have children, you'll know that. Well, maybe you don't want to know, but this is what happens. Anyway, they have lots of room. 4, 6, and 8. They're maybe on the small side, maybe 5, 7, and 9. They'd be a little bit more secure in the seats. Okay, so. But it works for now, and then I think when my 8-year-old gets to 10 or 12, well, then there's probably not enough room in this car anymore. But 4, 6, and 8 work fine, and at least another 2-3 years, I think that we could manage with 3 kids in the back. Okay, so it's a medium-sized car, not a large car, obviously. Now, I'm a big believer in the effect of the car's interior on the driver's psychology, and how that psychology influences their driving and driving safety. For instance, if you get in a Ferrari or a Lamborghini and you look at the cockpit, it looks like it's out of a fighter jet, and you have the booming, Italian exhaust note. Driving that car is just like getting hit by a jolt of electricity. And you can't help yourself but to drive it fast and to listen to the engine and the characteristics and the tuning, acoustically, and the feel of the different controls and so on encourages you to drive the car in a certain way. So if you do get in those cars, well, chances are even the best intentioned driver will drive it fast. If you get in something like a Range Rover, and you sit up high, and the sill is really low, and the car kind of gently rocks back and forth, and you think you're going to a garden party every time you get in it. Well, it's just not a car, at least for me, that encourages any kind of aggressive driving whatsoever, and you just kind of sit back and relax and, you know, let the car sort of like find its way to wherever you're going. Okay, that's a different kind of experience. With a Tesla, it's really quite interesting because it's not trying to be a hyper mile car where it's got like, you know, a huge visual display with like growing trees and, you know, happy you know, happy plants on it or something like that because you're driving nice. It's not trying to be that, but the overall impression that I get when I get in this car is that the car is going to do the driving for me, and in fact we'll get to that, but it does do the driving for you. So I get in this car and I get the feeling that I'm not really encouraged to do that much other than monitor it. And that wouldn't be that much different than if you go in like a glass cabin in a commercial airliner. You know, the car or the plane does the work. The pilot monitors all the systems and is there if something goes wrong. And that's how I feel when I get in a Tesla. That I am really just overseeing the operation of the machine, and I'm not really an active driver. I mean, I could be an active driver and the car handles fine and so on, but that's not the feeling I get, and that's not the, in my opinion, the psychology of the car. So when you get into a Tesla, you know, you will, you know, endeavor to understand some of the tech, and you will figure out some of the features, you know, understand the systems, their limitations, and let the car do its thing. And that's a really unique experience, and it doesn't exist anywhere else, you know, aside from Tesla. No other car on the road is anywhere close to this that I've driven. I mean, there's some new EVs like the Lucid that are coming out that have LiDAR and some other more advanced features, so we'll see about that. But for right now, this is in a completely different league. Okay, so that would be another differentiator of the Tesla, why it would be kind of completely different than anything else. Not necessarily the tech alone, although that is different, but the psychology behind the wheel and the way it makes you feel and your interaction with the car, which is kind of like an interaction with the machine and not really a car, if you can get that, if that subtle point comes across. Okay, so what's another differentiating feature of a Tesla? Well, the charging network is a totally different league from my experience in, you know, in Calgary, Canada, driving, you know, a handful of cars and trying to charge them at the fast chargers from Petro-Canada and Electrify Canada. Those, you know, those systems can be a bit fiddly. You have to use your credit card. Sometimes you get knocked out. The cords, for whatever reason, look like they're good for 1,000 kilowatts. You know, not the 100 or 150 that the car is going to take. So you wrestle with this like giant, you know, giant charging cord that I have trouble handling with one hand. I need two hands with these things. Okay, so you know, I'm, you know, a larger guy. I don't know if I gave it to my, you know, 70-year-old mother, I don't know whether she'd be able to do it. Like it's that heavy. Then it's a little bit fussy to get it to work. And then when you charge it, this I'm talking about the CCS chargers for some of the other cars, they don't charge that fast. I wasn't getting any more than an average between like 40 and 50 kilowatts. And, you know, if the car uses 25 kilowatts to go somewhere and you put the charge in at 50 kilowatts, that means, you know, 1 hour of driving, it's a half hour of charging. That's a ratio of stopping to driving that would make long distance touring in this area, you know, to take forever. I don't think anybody has the patience for that. But the Tesla superchargers, you don't have to fool around with a credit card. You just pull up, you just unhook the charge cord. The charge cord is half what the other ones are in terms of heft, and it's a lot more flexible. I don't believe the Teslas are liquid cooled, and the other charge cords at the ultra high charging stations are liquid cooled, so that probably explains why they're twice as big and probably 3 times as heavy. But the Tesla, you don't have to do that. You just plug it in and it just works. And you know, there's other people charging their cars there too. And you can tell that by the number of Teslas that are on the road, on the #1 highway at least, that this system works, and Tesla's nailed it, and they've been doing it for 10 years. And they're an order of magnitude, you know, further ahead than, you know, everybody else is, okay? So that's another thing about a Tesla that is a real differentiator, is the charging network. Now, this Tesla that I borrowed, it only saw its first supercharger when I borrowed it. The owner had never used one. Other people I've talked to maybe use one once a year. And, you know, the wealthy early adopters who buy these cars and have 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 cars just use this in the city, and then they have something else on the highway. Well, when we scale up the electric car production and we try to, you know, turn more of the fleet on the ground, you know, from the whatever 3% it is now to, you know, something close to half in the next 10 years. Well, that infrastructure is going to need to improve, and it looks like Tesla's 10 years ahead of everybody else on their infrastructure, or maybe 5 years. But for whatever reason, when you go to a fast charger with a Tesla, it just works, and it just doesn't, and I'm only getting half the charge rate with the other cars, okay? So that's another reason to buy a Tesla if you want to use it on the highway. Now, I'm not saying, you know, it's perfect, because, you know, they only put the fast charge stations, you know, along the #1 highway. So if you want to go anywhere else, you've got a problem. And, you know, if you're on the #1 highway and there's like some sort of issue, there's an accident, a fire, any number of things that could happen, and you have to diverge from that, well, now, you know, you're in trouble again, because there aren't that many supercharger stations that aren't on the #1. Okay. Also, as we get busier, you know, there might be lineups at the Tesla stations, so we hope that they keep building stations to adapt to the volume, and I'm sure, and they are. So I'm not terribly worried about that. But those are the things that I would say, you know, make this car a little bit different. So let's go inside the car and I'll show you some of the things in the software. Okay, well, I guess the first thing is that with the Tesla app, you're completely connected to the car. You know where it is, you know its state of charge, you know if it's locked or unlocked. If it's, you know, if you leave the trunk open, it'll send you a notice saying you left the trunk open. You can control it. From your phone. Okay, well, I mean, most electric cars have some functionality, but the Tesla goes one step further. It has all these cameras everywhere, so it's got this Sentry mode, and so it will display, you know, things that happened around the car that it might be concerned about. You can use the car as a security camera for your house. You know, this is the consumption this car has got over the last 50 kilometers, so that's interesting. Watt hour per kilometer, if you just take a decimal place off that, you get kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. It's calling up the information that I want. The web browser is pretty slick. Isn't that funny? I'm looking for the serial number of a 49 Willys on my Tesla while I was charging for a neat juxtaposition. Anyway, I find the infotainment comprehensive, the graphics to be well laid out. I like the information that it's presented, and you know, when you're charging, you can look up the serial number on a Willys Jeepster, or you can answer your emails, do all kinds of things. That makes the half-an-hour charging go pretty quickly when you have this kind of communication. Okay. So in other respects, I mean, it's just a well-designed car. It does the don't get your feet on anything, honey. It does everything you'd expect. It fits kids. It has the ISOFIX. It's a safe car. We've got a usable hatchback. We can fold the seats down. You can throw your bike in it. It does all the things you'd expect, a mid-sized sedan to do. But I would say again that the things that it does different and its competitive advantage, you know, over the new EV entrants, you know, would be the charging infrastructure, which is in a different league, the software in the car, which is in a different league, and this one falls into the category of just not better or worse, just different, and the interior design, layout, and the way the car makes you feel and the way that you interact with the car and the psychology that it imparts when you drive the car, and the way basically you interact with the machine. Okay, so that, I think those are the three really big differences between a Tesla and something else. If you want a driver's car, and you want the car to give you a whole bunch of information and put it front and center, and you want to feel the communicative steering, and you want to be a really active driver, well, it probably isn't your car. I mean, you know, drivers' cars like Porsche 911s, and in the EV world, even the Jaguar I-Pace that I drove, are a little bit more communicative, and they're probably a little bit more oriented to being a driver. This car is the Performance Edition. It comes with fat Michelin Pilot Sport 2s, Pilot Sport 4S's. That's a fat, sticky tire and 20-inch rims, and so the ride quality is a little bit rough on it, as you'd expect for a sport tuned suspension. It doesn't have air suspension, so you know, some of the cars with really low profile tires will have, you know, active air suspension, and that goes some way to mitigating the harshness of the low profile tires. This doesn't have it, so it's a fairly stiff ride, but you don't have to get the Performance Edition. You can get the regular one and then get more, you know, comfort oriented tires. So that would be, you know, that's something on the performance cars. But I would say that when you buy the Tesla, you know, you can get into it in terms of the tech, in terms of the data, in terms of understanding it, in terms of monitoring the car, and that's very satisfying, I think. But I think the one thing it isn't is a driver's car, and you know, I could see myself, you know, having this to drive the kids around and to use in the city, and really getting a lot of utility out of it and a lot of the features. But you know, maybe I have something else, you know, when I actually want to, you know, drive for the enjoyment of driving. So I hope that's clear, and that's just my take on a monumental car. I mean, this is, you know, when we look back at what Tesla did, it changed everything. I mean, it's just one of those pieces of industrial design that just shaped, you know, the world, and it did. This is just a monumental achievement from Tesla. So I'm grateful that it exists and appreciative to have used it for the better part of the week and enjoyed it considerably. Thank you. So Tesla's autopilot is in a completely different league, and we can see that the car, you know, because it has the camera arrays, can pick up all the vehicles in a front, back, and side to side. The autopilot's very fussy that you pay attention to it, and that you touch the wheel every so often. If you don't do that, it boots you out of the system, and it tells you that autopilot isn't available for the duration of the journey, and even if you stop the car and start it, it won't let you do it again. So it basically gives you a timeout and tells you that you're not paying enough attention, and that it's going to discipline you by pulling the feature for a while until you can get your act together. So it's there's times driving this car where you think that it's smarter than you are, and semi-sentient. Anyway, the autopilot works brilliantly. I think for whatever reason it doesn't want to let me do it right now. It doesn't think I'm a good enough driver to use it at the moment. I hope to earn its respect later and have it enable the feature for me. it's important to realize that it really is only as good as the lines on the road and so on, and it can get confused. So you wouldn't want to be 100% reliant on it. However, if you take the position that you're just monitoring it and you still have your hands on the wheel, I mean, it goes a long way to reducing fatigue, and especially if you happen to be a distracted driver. You know, I believe it's a much safer system. But you don't want to lay down on the back seat, put your feet on the steering wheel, and just assume that the car is going to properly deal with every situation, because it's just not there yet. Musk makes great use of the cameras, and he says that the cameras have greater bandwidth, and there's a lot more information flowing into the car from the cameras than radar. And so these systems, and you can see how well they work, is very reliant on the camera system. Other manufacturers, and Waymo and some other autonomous vehicles, use LiDAR. And LiDAR is basically laser radar. It basically spins in 360 degrees, takes thousands of different, or sends basically thousands of different light pulses out every second. And then these light pulses then bounce back to the LiDAR unit, and it gets very, very precise measurements on how far everything is away. So the LiDAR, coupled with medium and long distance radar, coupled with the camera, and when you take all of that data and you fuse it together in what we call sensor fusion, then you get the ultimate in kind of data reliability. Because if the camera gets confused by something, then the LiDAR is there to back it up, and it knows exactly how far everything is. Cameras don't on their own know how far things are away. They can take a picture of something, and they can infer how far it is away So I have to figure that out. And then I didn't ask it to play me Sade, but it's playing Sade for me. So the German cars aren't going to have this kind of sense of humor. You can tell that this is just Musk being funny, and you're not going to roll into a boardroom with the VW Audi group and say, you know, oh, I think we should have like a fire when we charge the car, or play Space Invaders, you know, or look at the car on the surface of Mars, or do any kind of crazy stuff. So that's just kind of funny, and it goes some way to explaining the loyalty of some of the Teslarati, I suppose you say, who really like the company. Okay, so we see now the kilowatts are down from the 135 to 87. At this point, it's giving me a 5-to-1 ratio between charging and driving. So overall, though, it's probably close to 6-to-1. I've added, looks like I've added 185 kilometers. I think I'm going to stop it soon, because I'm going to drive to Canmore, which is about, maybe 100 kilometers away, and I want to try the V3 supercharger, which is a 250 kilowatt charger, and so I want to see how fast that charges, and I want to try to compare it, like do it on the same day, the same car, and I want to do it as close as I can to the same state of charge. Okay, so I've stopped it. It looks like I came in with about 100 kilometers of range. I put in 211 kilometers of range. I have now 335 kilometers left. I'm going to go drive to Canmore and try that V3 supercharger and see what the rate is there. It looks to me like we've averaged something around 110 kilowatts average for the charge that's put in this car. We've gone from about 25% to 75%, so we've used about 50% of the battery, and the battery's 82 kilowatt hours total, so we've used about 50% of that. So we've used we put in around 40 kilowatt hours into the battery, and we're using about 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. So the 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers into 40 kilowatt hours is 200 kilometers. I started with 100 kilometers worth of range. I have 334 kilometers worth of range. So I've put in enough battery to go another 200 kilometers. Okay, so all that makes sense, and we put in 40 kilowatt hours. It's charged me $7.58 for 40 kilowatt hours. And let me just get my calculator and figure out what that is. And just thinking about this here, on the flow and the charge point chargers, I was getting around triple that, so around 50 cents a kilowatt hour. So if you're putting in 50 kilowatt hours and in an hour, and that's costing you, let's say, $25, then it's around 50 cents per kilowatt hour that you're getting charged at Petro-Canada. If you got something close to 100 kilowatt hours, it would be half that, or around 25 cents a kilowatt hour. Here with the Tesla, we're getting charged around 19 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, we've arrived at our destination in Canmore, just off the #1 highway, and we've used 100 kilometers worth of range. We went 100 kilometers. We've got the battery down to what looks to be about 40%. It's a little bit less. I think we had about 25% in the last time we charged. Last time we charged was a V2 150 kilowatt station. This is V3 250 kilowatts. Everything else being equal, the higher the state of charge, well, at least in this portion of the charge range at around 40, you'd expect to get a little bit less charge than at 25%, but this station has a lot more power. So I'm expecting and hoping for charge rates in kilowatts that start with a 2. Let's see what happens. We're going to open the door, which kind of had a hard time before finding it. So that's unlocked, and we'll go plug in and we'll see what this car will accept. And again, with the Tesla, we see other cars parked in the getting charged. And like I said, at the CCS stations, never saw anybody else charging all the times we've ever been there. And it's just super easy. So we've undid the door. We just unhook it and stick it in, and the car does its thing, and that's it. It's a lot easier than the CCS right now. The Tesla really shows you the way that should be done. So let's go see what it says on the car. And we can see it spooling up. And here we go. Will it give us anything in the 200 kilowatts? Well, we're 180, 175. Doesn't look like it. But when we started at the 150 kilowatt station, we started out at 135 at around 40% charge. It was giving us about 125, and this one is, well, it's going down faster than the V2, but I wouldn't say that much faster. It's not like we're getting, you know, anything close to 250 on this car. So let's just watch this for a while and let it settle. When it's giving us kilometers per hour in the 900 range, if you go 100 kilometers an hour, that means you have a 1 in 9 charge to driving ratio, and I've benchmarked 1 in 6 as being, you know, acceptable. So if we can continue this high, this is you know, entirely acceptable for cross-country work. But it won't stay at that. It's going to decrease because we're at 40% capacity, state of charge. And so let's see what happens to it. We'll come back in a few minutes. So we briefly saw something in the 185. You know, after a few minutes we've dropped to 140, and we'll see what happens in a few minutes. All right, so we've been here about 15 minutes. We're about halfway through the session. We had about 40% of the battery. Looks like we've put in 72 kilowatt. Sorry, that's the rate is it now down to 72 kilowatts. We've put in about 157 kilometers. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it looks like we've gone from 40 to 75%. So we've used about 35% of the 80 kilowatt battery pack. So maybe 25 kilowatt hours, I'd say. And then Okay, we finished our charging station, and we put in, 238 kilometers in about a half an hour. We were down to about 40 kilowatts near the end, which is the 90%. And so it would have, peaked at 185. 5 minutes later, it's at, 140, 150. After 15 minutes, when we get up to 75%, we're down in the, I think it was in the 85 kilowatt range, and then it slowly goes down to about 40 by the time we finish. And we went from 40 to 90%, and the battery is about 80 kilowatts. So we put 50% in the battery, that's about 40 kilowatt hours. And we did that for $9.36, and the 40 kilowatt hours has given us 239 kilometers, and we're using 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. 20 times 2 is around 40 kilowatt hours. So there we go, it all makes sense. And this, again, very painless and quick, and I had enough time to look up a few things on the net, make some phone calls, check my email, and the car's done. So I could actually sit here for longer doing stuff. So this amount of charging time for me is not objectionable at all. So making long distance travel in a Tesla, when you're getting, basically, over 100 kilowatts makes sense to me. With some of the CCS chargers that I've tried, at 50 kilowatts, well, it doesn't make sense. Okay, but these Tesla stations work. Okay, so now we get to the fun part. I've had this car for a better part of the week. We've charged up in Calgary and in Canmore, used a V2 and a V3 supercharger. We've got a handle on some real-world range numbers. We'll go through the car in numbers on a whiteboard, like classroom style, go through all the kilowatts and kilowatt hours, rates, measures, consumptions, capacities, to sort of better make sense of what you can expect in the real world driving and charging your Tesla Model 3. Okay, so let's turn this camera around and we'll put a pen to paper. Okay, I'll try to make this as concise as possible, but let's get started. And you have to forgive I'm no artist, so you have to forgive my illustrations here. Let's get started with this car. Okay, so here's my Tesla. Okay, so we've got two electric motors. We have one in the front that's about 150 kilowatts, and we have one in the rear, which is about 210 kilowatts. So we have 360 kilowatts of power, and if we take 360 divided by 0.745, that equals about 480 horsepower. But as I always say, let's forget about horsepower, and if you just think in kilowatts, kilowatts is the energy expended when the wheel turns, kilowatts is the power that the car receives when you charge it, kilowatt hours is the storage of the battery, and consumption is kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. We'll touch on that many times throughout this presentation, but if you just think in kilowatts, things start to make a little bit more sense. Just a refresher, we all know what a 100-watt light bulb looks like. If we have 10 of those, it's 1,000 watts. 1,000 watts is a kilowatt. If we light the 10 100-watt light bulbs for an hour, that's a kilowatt hour. That's the unit of measure for storing DC energy. It's also the unit of measure when you pay your electricity bill, okay? That's kilowatt hours. All right, so we have a battery in the middle. In the Tesla Performance, I've read 80 and 82 kilowatt hours, but let's go with 82 is the total kilowatt hours. Okay. Interestingly, I've weighed this car. I put it on the weigh scale, and I'm getting just under 1,000 kilograms per axle. I thought it was interesting that it was 50-50 weight distribution, and then the total weight of the car was around 1,900 kilograms with me in it, and I'm about 80 kilograms, so that's 1,820 kilograms times 2.2, and I get 1,820 times 2.2, I get just over 4,000 pounds. That's pretty light for an EV, considering it as 1,000 pounds of that is going to be the battery pack, or 1,200 pounds. So if you take, in conventional, combustion engine terminology, we have a 4,000 pound car with 480 horsepower. That's a fast car. You combine that with four-wheel drive and you accelerate very quickly. You combine that with no gear changes, and it's even faster. You combine that with instant torque from the electric motors, and it's blisteringly quick. So we're getting 0 to 100 kilometers per hour, depending on the surface of the road and so on, in the 3.2 to 3.6 second range. And it feels as fast to me as a Porsche Turbo. And that's on launch control, where you go through the protocol and you put your foot on the brake and you floor the throttle, and it raises the revs to 5,000 RPM and it launches it, okay? This, you just, step on the gas. It's faster than I can ever imagine anybody wanting to go, and it's so fast that I start to get, my vision starts to blur, and I start to feel a little bit queasy, like it's happening too fast and the road is too narrow. And, you know, I'm no race car driver, but I got a couple thousand laps on racetracks and have been driving 500 and 600 horsepower cars for 20 years. So I can't imagine you need to go any faster, but you can. If you get the Model S Plaid, you can get that down approaching 2 seconds. Okay, so we have a plenty fast car. We have a relatively small car with big power and reasonably lightweight. There's lots of EVs that are well over 5,000 pounds. Okay, so that's that. Let's go back to the battery. We have our 82 kilowatt battery, but we know that we don't use all 82 kilowatts of it. One, we're unlikely to get it into single digits when we're driving down the road looking for a charging station. Two, it's not very good for the battery to go all the way up to 100%, especially on a fast charger. So the Tesla has a setting, as we say, to wall it off at 90%, okay? Now, I would suggest that a practical limit is 10%. I mean, you can drive it all the way down to 0 and hope you make it to the next station, but you're probably not going to do that. And so I would say if you talk about real world range, it doesn't really do you much good to listen to the car and it tells you that you'll go so many kilometers before you stop on the side of the highway. I think, in my opinion, it's a little bit better to look at the actual range that is reasonably available to you. And also keep in mind, when range is going to be an issue, it's going to be on the highway. It's not going to be in the city. If you're in the city, you just drive it, park it at home and charge it. You're unlikely to get anywhere close to 0 in the city because you're not going to drive, 300 or 400 kilometers a day in the city. You're only going to do that on the highway. On the highway, you have to wait till the next charging station happens, which means you're not going to be using, single digits, okay? But for this purposes of this, I would say 10 to 90 is 80%, okay? So we know that we have total 82 kilowatt hours, and we know we're going to use about 80% of that, and so we have 0.8 times 82 kilowatt hours, and we get around 65. So that's 0.8 times 82 equals 65.6. Let's just call it 65. 65 kilowatt hours of usable battery storage. Okay, so now we talk about how far are you going to go on the 65 kilowatt hours and what's your actual range going to be. Okay, so let's talk about consumption. There's not a whole lot of difference in the efficiency of each individual motor. I mean, on the internet you can hear different theories about it, but in practice, in my opinion, the electric motor in a Ford or a Hyundai or a Tesla isn't going to be that much different in terms of actual efficiency. There's some differences in RPM and some other important differences, but in terms of just as it applies to energy efficiency, there's not too much to the motor, and I don't think there's too much that differentiates it. What differentiates the actual consumption is going to be the weight of the car and the shape of the car. Okay, the weight goes to inertia, and the heavier the car is, the more energy it takes to start it and to propel it, and the aerodynamics is extremely important, especially at high speeds. Not so much at low speeds, but at high speeds. The ratio between the energy required to propel the car and the speed is an exponential relationship. Not a physicist, but I think it raises by the square of the square of the speed. So in other words, it's not a linear relationship. So there's a bigger difference between 100 and 120 as there is from 80 to 100. Okay, let's have a stab at graphing this. Let's put our consumption in kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. And let's put our speed here. All right. And we'll put this in kilometers per hour. Okay. The electric motor is going to use more energy as it spins faster, but as you spin faster, you cover ground more quickly. So if you went, for instance, 1 kilometer an hour, well, that wouldn't be very efficient because it's going to take you a long time to get somewhere. And because it's taking you a long time to get somewhere, you still have to heat the cabin, you still have to heat the seats, you still have to run all the systems and so on. So it would use the electric motors, in this case there's 2, would use less energy, but the car would be on for a long period of time, and that wouldn't be efficient. You get to a point where there's like the maximum, and then you start to have to push more air out of the way. The laws that govern the amount of energy to push the car through the air at higher speed come into effect, and then you've got this exponential relationship between energy and consumption as the speed increases. So as the speed goes up, the efficiency decreases, okay? So I've seen, at 100 kilometers an hour, which is basically what you're going to be doing most of the time on the highway, I am going to see, let's put this at 20. I know that if I start and I go to, 110, 120, 130, 140, I know that the consumption is going to go up. So I would say at 150 kilometers an hour, you're probably pushing close to 30, maybe a bit less, kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. I know that this is going to be the low point around, I would say around 80, okay? And I think you probably get down to around maybe 15 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, okay? And then I think it would raise again, and you probably get back up to about 30. So I think your graph, is going to look something like that. And that's your consumption. Now, this is my estimate based on driving this car for the better part of a week in Calgary in, good conditions. I'm sure there's a Tesla person out there who's done the graph, and there's piles of engineers who own these cars. And so please correct me and put it in the comments. But that's about what I'm expecting. You go too slow and the electrical requirements of the car are still there. No matter how fast you go, you still need the blower motor to work at 1 kilometer an hour and 150 kilometers an hour. So the consumption isn't good. There's a point where it is the lowest that you're going to see, and that is probably around 15 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. And steady speed on the highway, if you're really going somewhere, I would say it's probably in the 18 to 19 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, okay? So when we talk about long distance range, you're probably not going to be able to go 80 kilometers an hour. You have to keep up with traffic. And so you're going to be in this range when you're traveling on the highway. So for the maximum practical range of the car, if we remember that we have 65 kilowatt hours of battery, and let's just pick the lower number. Let's say you're careful. We have 18 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. Well, then what you're doing is you're dividing 18 into 65. 65 divided by 18 is 3.6 times 100 equals 360 kilometers of real world range, okay? Now, you have some control over this. Let's say that the last charging station you went to is inoperative, unlikely with a Tesla because they all seem to work, and you had to maximize your range. Well, you could turn off all the electrical accessories in the car and slow down to, 80 kilometers an hour. And at the 80 kilometers an hour, you're using 15 kilowatts. And if I take the 65 divided by 15, that's over 400 kilometers. And then if I added the last 10% of the battery, that's another, 10% times 80, 8 kilowatt hours. So that's another 50 kilometers. So, you might get in the high threes if you did like a controlled range test on the car or something like that. But on the highway, going point to point, it's around 350. Now this is more than other EVs because one, we have a smaller car, like for instance, I just drove the Jag I-Pace and the Porsche Taycan and the Volvo XC40 Recharge, all great cars, but they're all quite a bit bigger or boxier. The Volvo uses a little bit more electricity, but that's a trade-off for getting an SUV, which has some more room in it, and this is a car. It's also a reasonably light car at around just over 4,000 pounds, okay? So, all that combined gives you, more range. Also, I should add that this is the performance edition of the Tesla Model 3. It's tuned for more handling. It's got big fat Michelin Pilot Sports on it, which aren't low rolling resistance tires, okay? And it's got 2 motors. So if you took some weight out of the car and you did the 1 motor version, and you did you had more range oriented tires, well, you're probably 5% or something like that. So I would say that with this design, if you combined all the best things for range, and you got the biggest battery with the lightest weight and 1 motor, and you had the the low rolling resistance tires, you could be up in 400 or a little bit more than 400 range. As it stands right now with this car driven normally, it gets I would say about 50 kilometers more than some other cars that either have slightly smaller batteries or a larger frontal area. Okay, so so we got that. Now the next topic then is, okay, so we know we have 65 kilowatts to put in. How long is that going to take us? Okay, well, we know at home we just plug the car into the charge port at home, and we charge it at 10 kilowatts or whatever we have for a service. We have a probably what we have with this car is a 50 amp. We're talking AC now from the home. That's my house. Okay, 50 amp breaker. We use 80% of that. That's the code. You can only use 80% of the amperage to make sure you have a safety margin. This equals 40 amps of power to the plug. Okay, and we have the 240 volt service. All houses have 120 volt and 240 volt. The 240 volt is for your stove and your dryer. The 120 volts are for everything else. So you want an electrician to wire it into your house with a 240 plug, and you want him to put in, or her, a 50 amp service. If you do that and you get the 240 volt times the 40 amps, you get 9.6 kilowatts. Okay, that's what comes out of the plug. Okay, and now you are taking the kilowatts and you are sticking it into the 65 kilowatt hour battery pack, and you're getting around, well, if we do the theory, we get 65 divided by 9.6 is 6.7 hours. Now, in practice, it doesn't quite work that way. It's not, the way you fill up a battery isn't linear like you would a hose in a bucket, where you can set the flow rate and the volume and then get an exact number. Battery chemistry is involved. The battery has to be at the right temperature. There's power electronics that monitor how fast the car can charge, at what state of charge. We'll get to that in a minute. And so you're not going to get the in theory number, but it's probably going to be in the 8 to 10 hour range. Keep in mind, at a lower state of charge, there's less variability. Okay, When you start to get to superchargers and so on, the rate of charge varies considerably because the power electronics needs to be a lot more careful about what power goes into the battery, okay? But at home, it's reasonably consistent. But with this, we can say, even if you emptied the battery and drove your 360 kilometers, you know, of range, like say you're a cab driver or something, and you had or an Uber driver, and you used it all up, you know, you plug it in, and 8 to 10 hours later, it's fully charged. And I think what we'll get is that, you know, there'll be incentive to charge it, you know, after midnight. So you set the timer on your car or in your home, you have some power management software, and then at midnight it comes on, you get the better rate, and, you know, you charge the car. In Alberta, we pay 15 cents a kilowatt hour, okay? And, you know, so a full charge, if we take 65 kilowatts times 0.15 is $9.75. So it's going to cost you around $10 to go around 360 kilometers if you charge at home. Okay, so I hope that's simple or straightforward. That's AC charge from the home, and that is, you know, what you can expect charging it. More than likely, at home, the battery never gets below half. You drive it 100 kilometers a day. You know, you plug it in, you're replacing 100 kilometers of range. You know, in the city, you're getting, you know, whatever between 15 kilowatts and 20 kilowatt hours of consumption. You know, you're putting in, you know, let's say it's 20 kilowatt hours of electricity, and you're going to stick it in at home at 10 kilowatts, and it's going to charge for like 3 hours, and that's all you're going to need every day. Okay, let's go to DC charging. This is quite a bit different. Okay, so on the same day, which is good conditions, around 20 degrees Celsius, I charged the Tesla up at the V2 150 kilowatt station at Cross Iron Mills in Calgary. And then I drove the car around 150 kilometers to Canmore, and I charged it at the V3 250 kilowatt station. And I took notes of the charge rate at different times in the charging cycle with a different state of charges. And I built this little graph. I didn't torture you by doing the graph and videoing it, but I did the graph, and I will put in the curves now. So first, with the V150 the V2 150 kilowatt station, when I got in there with a 25% state of charge, I was getting around, I saw a flash of about 135 kilowatts. It went down to 125 kilowatts. And then at the 50 kilowatts, I was down to 120. And then at 75, I was down to around 80. So my curve that I experienced would have been something like this. Okay, now I'm gonna extrapolate from that. I think that if I got there at 10% state of charge, it was a little bit higher, and so I can, you know, probably do something like that, and I can probably continue a reasonably linear relationship to 100. And I charged at this V2 station from 25% to 75%. Okay, and that would be a 50% increase in the state of charge, and I would have put in 211 kilometers of range with the trip computer showing about 19 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers of consumption. Okay, so all that makes perfect sense. Now, when I went to the Canmore station, I didn't have exactly the same state of charge. I charged it from 40 to 90. And when I got there with my 40%, I saw a flash of about 185 kilowatts. It went down pretty quick. And at 90, it was down to around 50. and at 80, 90 kilowatts. Okay, so my charge for the V3 supercharger went like this. Okay, I can extrapolate a little bit again, based on what I've heard online, based on what I've seen for charge curves for other Teslas. If I'd have got there at 25% state of charge, I could have expected more. And so I'm going to take this line and I'm going to do something like that with it. This is the V3 250 kilowatt. This is the V2 150 kilowatt. Okay, so we can see that, you know, in this area here, if I was to shade it, would be the incremental advantage for the V3 over the V2. We can also see that over 50%, you know, over 50%, it's not that much of a difference, okay? It's really when you get lower in the state of charge that the difference might be between about 200 and maybe 130, but that shrinks pretty quickly. Also, on the highway, what's really going to happen is you're probably going to charge wherever you have the opportunity. You're probably not going to wait till you have 10 or 15 or 20% state of charge and then go look for a Tesla supercharger to try to charge it up. You're probably just going to charge anytime the battery gets under 50% state of charge and top it up. That's what most reasonable, I think, the most reasonable thing to do. So most of the time, I think you're going to be charging, you know, from 40 or 50%, meaning there's not that much of a difference. In other words, it's the car itself that is limiting the amount of charge into the battery in the interest of preserving the battery pack. That is going to be really the limiting factor, not so much the V2 or V3 superchargers. So in the whole scheme of things, you know, charging it from 40% state of charge on a V3, you know, might save you a few minutes, but not, I wouldn't expect any more than that. It wouldn't be a radical change. Now, it's interesting to note that I've seen other charge curves for Tesla Model 3s in different places, in Europe, for instance, and I saw one that's basically close to 150 the whole way, okay? So I think that these curves vary dramatically depending on where you are in the world, the infrastructure that's there, the outside and inside temperature of the cars. The batteries in this case were all preconditioned. I put them in the nav so the batteries were at the correct temperature. So we'll get that out of the way. So I think that just because I received that in Calgary, Canada at 20 degrees Celsius with this particular car on this particular day, it's a data point. I think it's what you can expect, but I wouldn't say that this is necessarily going to be what every Tesla driver anywhere in the world expects. And I think that, you know, the Chinese cars have different batteries and so on. So just keep that in mind when interpreting, you know, this graph. The forums are filled with engineer Teslarati owners who are posting all of their charge times and stuff like that. So you can find local information, I think, fairly easily. In Calgary, Canada, that's what I got in the fall of 2021 though. Okay, and lastly, let me leave you with this. The Tesla, it provides numbers that are a little bit different. But what it does is when you start charging, for instance, it'll give you a number like 800 kilometers per hour of charge. Now, I don't really love that because kilometers an hour is already used. And I think it's already confusing enough rather than to put out a number that says 800 kilometers an hour and use that for both speed and charge speed without denoting that there's a difference. So I don't know why. I think if people are going to understand EV math and EV nomenclature and so on, that we really should agree on the measures. But anyway, and we see this number directly related to, you know, the kilowatts. Okay, so that's what it's, kilowatts in consumption. So when you start the charge and it's at 185 kilowatts, it's going to tell you that you're adding range at 800 kilometers an hour, and this number then falls pretty quickly along with the graph. Okay, so you might get it down to, you know, as little as 100 kilometers per hour. And I just thought I'd maybe shed some light on this number because, you know, when I look at long distance travel in an EV, what I want to know is the ratio between stopping and driving. And so in earlier videos, I said that, you know, if I had a combustion engine vehicle with more or less unlimited range, like that I'd still stop every 3 hours for about 20 minutes. In other words, if you do just for, you know, washroom or food or gas or whatever you need to stop for, and that's about a 1 in 6 ratio. So, sorry, 1 in 9 ratio, 20 minutes every 3 hours. And so, you know, if I was to take a long distance drive in an electric car, presuming that there's charge stations everywhere along the way that I want to go, so that's a pretty big presumption. If you live in Canada, you're just looking at basically a Trans-Canada highway. But given that, let's say I was going to Vancouver, how long would I have to stop for for what period of driving? Okay. Now, you know, the fastest EVs, like the Porsche Taycan, which use, fastest in the sense of fast charging, also the fastest, but actually that's a Tesla Plaid. But the fastest charging EVs that use 800 volt architecture that can hold a peak charging rate for longer, because the 800 volt allows thinner cabling and less heat, and heat buildup is the reason that, you know, these curves decrease. Okay, they can manage it in theory of a 1 in 6 ratio, so stopping a half an hour for every 3 hour drive. Okay, I've seen actual results, or at least on the net from companies. Now, I've seen accounts or read accounts of people getting that in Europe. I have not seen people getting accounts of that in Canada or in North America. Okay, so but in theory, like something like a Taycan, when everything's firing properly and the infrastructure is working as it should, which it isn't in North America, but if it were, it would get to a 1 in 6 ratio. Well, this number here, with the presumption that you're traveling 100 kilometers an hour on the highway, is that ratio. If it's 800 kilometers, that's an 8-to-1 ratio. If it's 100 kilometers per hour, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So we see this number falling from 800 kilometers an hour to 700 to 600 to 500 on the Tesla display. And what that is really telling you is the ratio, if you're driving on the highway at 100 kilometers an hour, of how the range you're getting. So what that's telling you is if you're going, you know, let's say you're going 500 kilometers per hour, if you do the math backwards, if you drive for 500 kilometers, you will charge for 1 hour. And if you go 100 kilometers an hour, that is a 5-to-1 ratio. I hope that makes sense. That's what matters to me is, you know, how much of this journey is going to be spent at a charging station, and what am I going to do at the charging station? And as I shown you earlier in the video, with a Tesla, you have all kinds of things to amuse yourself, and, you know, great web browser and so forth, and games and whatever. I've found in my experience that 30 minutes goes by pretty quick, and I could even stay there for longer. So that, to me, a 30-minute stop every 3 hours isn't really an impediment to me driving an EV, because I like to, you know, keep track. I'm sure, like many people, keep track of their emails and so forth, and you know, I get them all day long, so it's good for me to stop. Okay, so with all that, I hope this Tesla math makes sense. And if you've read other parts of the review, sorry for it being so long, you'll know that I'm very impressed with the car. I'm very impressed with the tech. I'm very impressed with the software, the interface, the autopilot, the charging network, the speed. You know, it's the state of the art EV at the moment, and I very much like to have one. I'm appreciative of the owner for letting me use it for almost a week. Thanks, Mike. And please like and subscribe, and we'll do some more videos on EVs. Porsche Taycan is next. Thank you very much. Lawrence Romanosky for the Soleil EV Buyer's Guide, the link of which is below. Please have a look at that. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.